الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر.
The Prophet Muhammad said that Allah or God has sent over 124,000 messengers. So we believe as Muslims that God has sent messengers to every people in every age. It is not that just God has only sent messengers to the Bani Israel or the children of Israel, but every people have had messengers sent to them to remind them that they should single out God for worship and they should avoid the worship of all false gods. Now, a very important part of our belief about messengers is that the messengers are all human beings. Yes, they are extraordinary human beings in the sense that they may have certain capacity they may have a certain physical strength, a certain mental strength. Certainly, in terms of their character, they are very truthful, trustworthy, honest. This is the characteristic of the messengers. And they should be like that because they are the ones who are carrying a message that is from God, and they are there to remind people that they should obey God. So that it is essential that the people whom God has chosen to carry His message are those people whom others will believe. And in reality, if a person is honest and truthful and trustworthy, then naturally as human beings we are inclined to believe them and trust them, and also probably or possibly follow them. So why is it so important that God has chosen human beings to be messengers for human beings? The reason is because the messengers are not only charged with delivering a message in the same way that a postman knocks on your door and gives you a letter, and then it's up to you to open the package and to read whatever the letter contains. No. The messengers are living examples of how to follow that message. So not only do they deliver a message, but they do it in the most effective and practical way that leaves the recipient with the least excuse not to follow God's guidance. So they live the message. This is why Aisha referred to the character of the Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, as being that of the Quran. His character was the Quran. In other words, he lived it. He was a living exemplification of how to follow the message of the Quran. And that is why the example of the Prophet Muhammad, which is called in Islamic tradition the Sunnah, which means the way. So his example is considered to be as important as the Quran as a source of information on how to follow God's religion and how to obey God. This is why you will find people talking often about the Quran and the Sunnah, because the Sunnah is the practical implementation of the Quran. In fact, we can't explain the Quran correctly without the existence of the Sunnah. The Quran, for example, tells us to pray, but it does not really detail very much about how to pray, which means that if we only had the Quran, we might be pretty much free to come up with anything that we like in respect to prayer. Maybe we could just dance around and do all sorts of extraordinary things, right? And say this is prayer. No, the Sunnah, or the living example of the Prophet Muhammad, defines for us exactly what prayer is. The Quran directs us and guides us to many things, to good manners, to neighborliness, to obedience to your parents. But the Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, details for us how those things practically should manifest themselves in our lives. And because he was a human being, and he not only taught those things, but he showed us how to do them. From a psychological point of view, that means that if one human being can do it, then another human being can do it. It's very interesting that one of the things that the pagan Arabs complained about was, if God is going to send a messenger, why doesn't he send an angel to announce all of this to us? And the explanation for that is really quite simple, because an angel, the nature of an angel, as we've already heard in the previous discussion, the nature of angels is different. Angels don't have a choice to obey or disobey God. Angels naturally obey God. They are not tempted in the same way that we are tempted. So if God had sent angels, then we human beings would be saying, oh, well, it's easy for you to say, don't do this or do that. You're an angel. But if you were a human like us, you would understand how difficult it is. So we don't have an excuse to say anything like that. If the messenger is human and he is practically showing us, even though he also has the same desires as us, he feels hunger like us, he feels thirsty like us, he forgets and he makes mistakes like we human beings forget and make mistakes. Yet this human, this man, this person still manages to accomplish living his life in a way that is most pleasing to Allah. It is very sad, unfortunately, that there are some people, they call themselves Muslims, who they actually go as far as to suggest that the Prophet Muhammad, and this is despite the Quran clearly saying that the Prophet is a human being, they go on to suggest that he is some sort of spiritual being, that he's made of light, and that he is somehow not human. But actually, this contradicts everything God tells us in the Quran about messengers and the purpose of him sending messengers. And this, by the way, on top of it, does not actually elevate the status of the Prophet Muhammad in any single way, because the fact that the Prophet Muhammad was a human being, the fact that he was a human being, and the fact that he had desires like our desires, that he felt hunger, that he was thirsty, that he desired women, that he had the same needs as all of us, yet he was still able to live an exemplary lifestyle that until today stands as a most excellent example for anybody who believes in God on the last day. Actually only makes him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, more extraordinary and more a object of our love and adoration and desire to emulate. And I say adoration within the context of the permissible way that we are allowed to love and should love the Prophet Muhammad. May God's peace and blessings be upon him. Now, all believers love the prophets of God. We love the prophets of God, and we do not make any difference between the messengers, in the sense that we do not believe in some and disbelieve in others. Actually, different prophets had different qualities. And the Quran mentions many prophets, including those who are very, very familiar to Jews and Christians. Moses is mentioned in the Quran. In fact, there is so much about Moses in the Quran that the scholars said the Quran nearly became the book about Moses. Moses is mentioned and talked about a lot in the Quran, because actually there are great similarities between what Moses went through and between what the Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, went through. And part of the reason for God telling us the stories of the prophets in the Quran is to be a source of inspiration and motivation for the believers. Jesus is mentioned in the Quran, and it is made very clear that although he was created miraculously by God, so therefore he had no father, he was still a human being. He was a creature. He was a human being. He ate food. He walked in the markets. He was born and he will die. This is the reality of Jesus and all the prophets of God, that they are human beings, as I have mentioned. So we have Noah, we have Abraham is mentioned in the Quran, we have Moses, we have Jesus, we have John the Baptist, we have Elijah, we have Jonah, we have Solomon and David, and then we have other prophets who are mentioned that who may not be so familiar to Jews and Christians, but they were prophets sent to other peoples amongst the Arabs. So, as I said in the beginning, there were over 124,000 messengers sent to humanity. And this is to reinforce something that is already deep inside our nature, and that is the recognition that this universe has a Lord, a Creator, a Sustainer, and that we should single out God alone for worship. And this is the task of all the messengers, as Allah says in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا نَعْبُدُ اللَّهِ وَاجْتَنِبُ الطَّاغُوتَ. That we did not send to any nation a messenger except that he called the people to worship God alone and to reject the message of, to reject the worship of the false gods. This is the call, and this is the message of all the messengers, and that was the message of the final prophet, the last prophet, who is Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him.